Welcome to Learning Unlocked. I'm your host, Britt Bingold. As an instructional specialist in Gilbert, Arizona, I'm a total nerd when it comes to classroom strategies and educational pedagogy. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. So today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Hey key holders, welcome to today's podcast. Before we start today, I just wanted to make a quick announcement that if you're listening to this podcast as a Gilbert Public Schools employee, and I just want to let you know that you can get some PD recertification credit for listening to this podcast. So please visit our digital PD page in the Employee Hub for more information. I can't believe we're already on episode 3 of this podcast. Every single time I start it, I just get more and more excited. And I think it's just been something that has been so fun to do over this summer, especially during our quarantine that we're going through. It's nice to be able to connect with educators throughout the district about what they've done successfully in the classroom. Today we are discussing how to teach like a pirate based off of Dave Burgess's novel. And we are discussing it with a modern language teacher named Kaylie Peterson, and she teaches Spanish in a middle school in our district. And we're going to talk about how does she leverage this idea of increasing engagement the pirate way. I don't think pirates actually sound like that, but that's what my kids say. And how do we get that to work for students? How do we get that to increase their level of engagement so that they can learn, and they can learn in this way that makes them excited? So I am super excited to interview Kaylie, and I hope you guys enjoy listening to the interview. So without further ado, here is my interview with Miss Kaylie Peterson. Hey Kaylie, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great, Britt.
Are you super excited? I'm super excited.
I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, so today we're talking about increasing engagement the pirate way, which I'm so excited. But first, before we kind of get into that and dig into all of that, can you tell me a little bit about yourself as an educator? What are you working on now? What are your passions and that kind of thing?
Sure. So I'm just actually finishing up my 7th year of teaching, all
Woo!
at Desert Ridge Junior High. I know I've made it this long. And
Once you're
hopefully many
in.
more years.
Yeah, once you're in, right? I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've taught Spanish all the years that I've taught. I recently actually just finished up my master's in administration.
Oh, awesome. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then some of my hobbies outside of school are reading and puzzles, knitting, hiking, and binge watching TV shows, which I've been doing a lot of lately.
Well, all of those things seem to work really well with quarantine. So it seems like.
Yeah, anything quiet and indoors, I love.
So that's good. So the quarantine hasn't been too bad for you then.
Yeah, I've been surviving it.
Okay, good. And then I see that you're a 5th generation teacher. That's amazing.
Yes, all the way back to, gosh, my great-great-grandmother, that would be.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think sometimes it runs in the genes. I look at my daughter and I'm like, yeah, it's happening. You're going to be a teacher for sure. All right. Could you give us a quick overview about just this idea of increasing engagement the pirate way? Like, how did you start this strategy? Did you create it, read about it, find it in a podcast, an article? Where did you kind of start?
So actually, I first saw the book Teach Like a Pirate by Dave Burgess at a district training, and the title immediately caught my attention. Obviously, it's super catchy. And then once I read the back cover description, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go buy my own. They had it as an option for me to borrow, but it was the type of book that I was like, yeah, I'm going to definitely be marking this and writing in it and highlighting, and I need my own. So I went out and bought one that night. And then, yeah, just the book, to give it a quick summary, just talks about engagement strategies and how a teacher must be a pirate, and that acronym stands for having passion, being immersed in the learning, having rapport with kiddos, asking questions to stimulate the creative process, transforming your teaching, and then being enthusiastic to engage students. So, this book is kind of the last part once you've mastered content and technique. This book is the presentation of the content. And then it also, the second half of the book has a lot of hooks that teachers can use to help energize lessons and engage students.
That's awesome. I honestly, okay, so I have to confess that I've never read this book, even though my boss has read it and loves it, and she talks about it all the time. So, like, I didn't even realize pirate was an acronym until you just said it. So, passion, immersion, rapport,
Yep.
ask, analyze, transformation, and enthusiasm. That's the pirate acronym, right?
That's the pirate way.
Okay, and this is basically like, and I didn't even think about this, but it's more like you've got your stuff down. Like you know your priority standards, you know your skills, you know what you need to teach. And this is what you layer on to kind of get that student engagement increased in your classroom.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Awesome. So when you first started this, okay, so you read the book, you marked it up because you just had to. You were like, "Oh my gosh, I got to dig in." That's how I am too. I have to mark things and like write notes and stuff. But when you first started this, were there some pitfalls and challenges that you faced on early with these strategies?
Oh, definitely. There were actually two that really came to mind when you asked me that. So, the first pitfall is as I was reading, the author is super extroverted and energetic, and I tend to be more of an introvert. So he even describes himself as like the cartwheel somersault type of teacher. And so I
Oh,
had to, yeah, he's really intense and it's wonderful and it works for him.
right.
It just wasn't my style. So I had to really look at what he was doing and apply it to what I would do in my own classroom while keeping the same level of enthusiasm and energy.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It's so funny, even from just like what I said, what your passions were. You listed a lot of introverted passions, like reading and writing, just kind of sitting at home. I
Yeah.
can't, and I'm totally the opposite. I'm an extrovert. So like quarantine is literally like killing my soul. It's so bad that I've had to just join TikTok and like basically lip sync to the world because I need to perform. And my husband's like, wow, this is totally like ingrained in your soul. So I can see reading a book like this, you definitely would have to find a way to make it your own.
Well, and I actually had a couple of teachers mention that to me as I was reading it, is they said, "Oh, I started the book, but I don't have his level of energy. I can't do it." But it was
Hmm.
just about taking that extra step of, yeah, what he does is great, but how can I make it my own and doable for me?
Right. Yeah. Especially in a Spanish classroom too. I mean, you can apply this book to any content area. So it's not like it's just like strictly one content. You say that it's pretty simple to implement as long as you just make yourself comfortable with it.
Exactly. And then
Awesome.
another pitfall that I faced with this book, is that coming up with creative ideas does take more work, but the work is definitely worth the reward. So once I read about some of the hooks that the author uses within the book, I did spend time collaborating with other teachers and looking up ideas online and reading blogs and asking myself different questions, thinking about the answer. Because creativity doesn't just come out of the blue. It was engaging in that creative process and setting aside the time to be able to participate in that.
Right. And I feel like, especially in middle school, they're coming from different contents. So when they're coming in from math or wherever they're coming in into your classroom, to get them focused on Spanish, you need to have some type of hook that's creative, that's engaging, that invites them into the learning. And I think that's a misstep a lot of young teachers make. That I've noticed is they just kind of start, like, okay, here we're going with this.
Hmm.
And so I really like that you had to kind of take some time and be like, okay, creativity and curiosity is super important to getting kids engaged and on board with whatever is going to come next. And especially in that middle school, high school level, they have to be able to have some brain transition time, I feel like, from one class to another.
Definitely.
Okay. So, what makes the Pirate Way different from other ways, do you think, of increasing student engagement? Because there's so many. I mean, there's books out there, they're like 40 ways to increase student engagement. And you're like, that's a lot of ways, you know? What do you think is special about this way of doing it?
So I just really think that the Pirate Way takes student engagement to the next level. I know we've all read those books, attended those classes that talk about engagement strategies that are effective and that are wonderful. But
Mm-hmm.
with the Pirate Way, the difference is that students are so excited and enthusiastic about being there that they put forth their own effort to participate. It's not something you necessarily have to draw out from them.
Yeah, and I mean, I could see like, oh, this next year being so tough, you know, with trying to make sure they're engaged when they're in kind of a scary situation with, I think the way their classrooms are going to be set up with the COVID. You're really going to need some strategies to get them comfortable, you know, to get them to be able to feel like they're enthusiastic in class. Because we really did see a lot of enthusiasm go down during remote learning because that connection and that rapport just in an instant went away. So I feel like the Pirate Way can also be used with remote learning. Even I know we're supposed to go back in the fall, but I'm sure there might be some waves like where we're back and we're not. And I think this could take engagement to the next level. Like, you know, digitally, you can still have kids participate and draw out their own enthusiasm by using these strategies. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. It's so important, especially right now when students have to, with the online learning, and if some sort of online learning continues next year, that they are the ones, they don't have us sitting there next to them saying, hey, this is something you need to do. Here's your calling card. It's your turn to answer.
Right.
They have to want to participate from within. And so some of these pirate way strategies can help with that.
Yeah, I mean, just even to get them to log in to a WebEx meeting or a Zoom or whatever, I mean, they have to have that passion within themselves to really want to learn. I think that's something that we've seen a lot this year is this last quarter is they really are learning because they want the grade, right? So
Exactly.
going forward, I think a lot of us teachers are seeing, wow, we need to use more strategies that get them to learn for learning's sake. And we need to figure out what that is and tap into that. So that's why I was excited about this pirate strategy because I thought, yes, it starts with passion. And I think that's what's important. What are those passions? Like, you know, you need to teach Spanish. This is the class they're in. But is there a way for them to get their own individual intrinsic passion in that subject area? So, kind of walk us through your step by step process. Like, you are planning a lesson and you're like, okay, it's the Pirate Way. I want to make sure my classroom, you know, has this vibe. I want my students to buy in. Just kind of give me like a deep dive into the strategy of how you can use it day to day in your Spanish classroom.
So, just kind of going through the acronym of pirate, the first thing that I make sure I have is passion for what I'm teaching. So, as much as I would love to be passionate about all of my content, I'm honestly not. But to keep the passion and the fire burning, I bring in other things that I'm passionate about. And something that the author talks about is if you're not necessarily passionate about this content that you're having to teach, I love puzzles. So if I'm not passionate about the content, I'll bring in a puzzle or a problem solving activity that I am passionate about, or a movement activity that I'm passionate about. So even if I'm not passionate about the content, I can be passionate about the activities that I'm planning, or passionate just for teaching itself. And then it keeps the fire burning and the excitement going for me. So if it's something I'm kind of not super excited to teach about, that's something that I try to bring in.
Totally. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to get so many emails about this, but like, I don't love Shakespeare. Okay. And don't tell Miss Wendy because
Oh, yeah. Woo.
she's going to be so mad. But I, as an English teacher, high school English teacher, I just Shakespeare and I just didn't get along. And so I would always have to teach Romeo and Juliet. And for me to find a passion for that, I would look at how to make it relevant for students. So I would talk about like, why do teenagers rebel? Because to me that would be more relevant to them, and they were able to kind of connect with that, because really that's what those teenagers are doing. They're rebelling against their parents, and why at that age. And so we would go into like brain research and all that type of stuff of that age group. So I would still teach the content, but like you said, I would kind of move the passion into a direction that not only I liked more, but that the students would maybe see as more relevant to them.
That's a perfect example. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, don't tell
I
don't
won't
tell
tell
Wendy.
Wendy, man. We'll keep
Wendy
it a
loves
secret.
Shakespeare. Yeah, oh my gosh, she has this statue of Shakespeare out in our office, and I'm always just like, oh, I feel like he's watching me and judging me a little bit. So okay, so you said the second part's immersion. Is there anything else you have to add about passion? Because I think that was a great example about introducing puzzles and movement into your content so that it keeps it fresh.
No, that was really all I had to say about that. But moving on to immersion, which is the I in the pirate acronym, is
Yeah.
it's so important that once you have the plan and you're giving it to the students, that you immerse yourself completely in what you're teaching. And I think that's a mistake that sometimes teachers make just because we have so much on our plates,
Mhm.
that you're teaching slash grading slash everything else that we need to do. But if you're giving the most important part of the lesson your partial attention, it's sending the students the wrong message and telling them that what they're learning is not important enough to require your full attention. So whatever you choose to do, you need to be there 100% when you're doing it.
So, do you feel like that comes for you in more of a direct instruction model, or like facilitating, just being present, like not maybe just giving them something and sitting down, but maybe just, I mean, like, how do you feel like you immerse yourself when you're teaching a new part of a new lesson?
So there's a couple of different ways I immerse myself. I mean, even just proximity and being near and being able to, like in my classroom, when students are speaking the language, being able to help them edit and ask
Right.
follow up questions of the conversations that they're having. And I think just being there with them and listening is enough versus, sitting at my desk and watching. They're not going to get the same attention as when I'm standing right there in the middle of what they're doing.
Especially it's in a world language, it is immersion, right? I think we always talk about like if you want to learn a language, immerse yourself in the language, you know? So I think even if it's not world language, you as a teacher, you're if you're a math teacher, you're speaking a totally different language to your students than they understand, you know? So you have to remember that they're learning something that is totally new and they need to be immersed in that, and you have to be there to guide them. So I think that's really important. That's awesome. And then you also wanted to talk about rapport, and obviously rapport is super important. I mean, our district is rigor, relevance, relationships, and I hate the order because I feel like relationships should come first in that order, because without having that rapport and that relationship, the students won't follow you down that rigor hole. And so what were you saying about that? Because what I kind of was interested to see what Dave Burgess was saying about rapport too.
Yeah. So, and this could honestly be like its whole entire podcast on its
I know.
own. And I hate that it's just such a small section right here. But really, what the author talks about is having that rapport with students has to be established first. Otherwise, they're not going to buy into any of the engagement strategies or lesson hooks. And frankly, it can be scary to try some of the things for teachers and for students that are listed in the book. So you have to establish that trust between the teacher and the students, and then also between the students themselves first, before you can even add in any of these cool hooks that the author talks about. And then he also mentions that, having this rapport and using the engagement strategies can help eliminate a lot of behavior issues that stem from boredom or feeling overwhelmed or having a lack of connection with what's being learned. So rapport is kind of the first step a teacher has to take and build a community within the classroom before moving on to some of the teach like a pirate strategies.
And so, like, how do you feel like you establish a rapport? Do you do it like, I mean, I know it comes throughout the year, but do you do anything specific at the beginning of the year with your students so that they do buy in and they do trust you? Is there anything that, like, I'm a brand new teacher and I have no idea how to do this or establish this with my students? Could you give some advice on how to develop that rapport, right? Just from the first day?
I always start the first few days of school. We don't even get into Spanish the first few days of school, if I'm being honest, just because I think it's so important to build that community first. So we spend the first 3, 4 days of school just getting to know each other and building that trust between us. And I also always tell my students, and I'll share stories of myself making mistakes as well. Of it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to giggle as long as we're being respectful and we're learning from those mistakes. And I think that lessens a lot of the anxiety is you're not going to be perfect. I, as the teacher, am not going to be perfect, but that's okay. Let's use those imperfections to learn from each other and build.
Oh my gosh, I love that you just said that because I was exactly the same. Like, I don't think I touched English for the first 4 days, 5 days. Like, I would always tell my students very similarly that I would expect them to fail, and I hoped they failed soon. And they would just look at me like I was insane. And I'm like, honestly, if you don't fail, I don't know where to start. And so I'm going to give you things that are challenging, and I need to see where you're at with them. If we succeed, that's fabulous. But if you fail, that's also fabulous. It's gonna let me know where we need to go in class, and that I want to be with you through this learning process. It doesn't matter what my lesson plan is until I know who you are, because every year those kids are different. And so I always felt like I couldn't really create my lessons until I knew the kids. And I think just being upfront and honest with them about that was an automatic way for them to understand that I am your teacher for this year. You are my kids for this year. And so we have to figure out together where we need to go with these skills that you need to know by the time you leave me.
Well, I love that. And the author actually used a phrase that I love and I'm going to share here. He says something like, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback.
Oh, I love that. That should be like someone's email signature line. Maybe that'll be mine.
Right? Need a poster of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, they always looked at me like I was crazy. But I'm like, guys, if you don't, I mean, that's life. We have to fail to learn. So that's awesome. I love that. So ask, analyze. I'm super interested by this. Could you please explain this portion of the pirate analogy? Like, sorry, the acronym?
Yes. So the ask and analyze was actually different than what I anticipated it being when I started the chapter. So the ask part of the acronym is just asking yourself the right questions to get into the creative thought process. So I know a lot of people think you're either creative or you're not, but that's actually fixed mindset. Anyone that knows me knows I'm all about the growth mindset. Creativity is a skill to be developed, right? It's not something you have or don't have. So by asking yourself the right questions, your brain can start thinking in a more creative way. So some of the questions I tend to ask myself as I'm planning are like, how can I incorporate movement into this lesson? How can I allow students to show their creativity? How can I make this more similar to a real life situation? Can I make this humorous? Which collaborative strategies can enhance their experience? Can I enhance the lesson with music? And then by engaging in this thought process, I'm opening my mind to that creativity and the ideas start coming.
that list just makes me happy. I'm going to make sure we have that list of questions in our show notes because I think people are going to be like trying to scribble those down. So I'm going to put them in our show notes at the end of the episode so people can have them because I think if we went through that process as teachers, I think our lessons would come out a lot more like a totally stellar. So that's awesome.
And it gets easier the more you engage in the process. It might not come right away or it might take more time, but the more you do it, the easier the ideas will flow.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely like the first time you're going to be like, this takes forever. But then as you do it, or you might even see that like a lesson that you've done before definitely lends itself to music, while maybe another one lends itself more to collaboration.
Exactly. Well, and that even goes to the second part of this A acronym, which is analyze. And once you kind of have those ideas and you're looking at your lesson plan, is just analyzing it to make sure that the activity and the creative ideas that you have value in your classroom. So an idea can be fun, it can be creative, the students can love it. But if it's not following your standards, if it's not following your learning objectives, then it's a waste of time. So you have to take your ideas and say, okay, is this just fun, or is it fun but also adding value to what we're learning?
Right. And that's a hard balance. I mean, there's things I did when I first started teaching 11 years ago where I just was like, oh my gosh, To Kill a Mockingbird, I'm going to build a tree out of paper mache and it's going to be beautiful. And we're just going to post all of our learning to this. And it was basically what Jennifer Gonzalez calls a Grecian urn assignment, where like it literally was really fun and pretty, but had no relevance or rigor to any standard I was teaching. And it was something I had to realize I needed to cut out later on as I became, I guess, just more familiar with teaching pedagogy and rigor and relevance and all of those things that you just learn as you teach more. But I love that you have to really look at what strategy and what tool actually does enhance it. It doesn't mean you can't have fun for fun's sake sometimes, but the majority has to be with that relevance and that rigor and making sure you're covering the skills for sure.
Exactly.
Okay, and so then you have a car analogy, and I'm interested
Oh,
to
yes.
know what your car analogy is.
So the car analogy actually just has to do with the creative thinking process and asking ourselves those questions. So it's actually the author's analogy, not my own. But he talks about when his family was growing, they needed to buy a new car. And so they decided to buy a minivan. And I don't remember what kind of minivan, but he never really noticed minivans on the road before. Once he bought himself a minivan, then all of a sudden he saw minivans everywhere and everyone had a minivan. And so he was saying it's not that there were more minivans on the road all of a sudden, it's that his brain registered, like, oh, this is important, and started picking up on it. So
Okay.
if we tell our brains it's important that I'm creative and I need to look for ideas to be creative and ask creative questions, then our brains see that that's important and they just automatically start going through the thought process and finding ideas once we get into that habit.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I did the same thing when I was pregnant. I just was like, I'm pregnant, and everyone around me I know is. It was like I just noticed all the pregnant people, and now that I'm not, like I don't notice anyone is. I think it's the same. It's one of those things. So I love that if you're like in that creative process, I think a lot of teachers struggle with that too. I mean, and it's hard to like rework something that you have enjoyed doing for so long. But if they practice it more and more and more, it will become easier. And I like that a car analogy. Like you'll see it more in your mind if it is something that's kind of at the forefront of your mind. So transform. How do we transform our lessons, Kaylie? Because it's going to have to happen, especially now.
Yes, definitely. So, just the main thing he talks about with transforming your lessons is just including real life situations that helps create buy-in and connection with students if they see what they're learning is relevant to the real world. So just as much as you can transform your lessons to include those real life situations, the author also talks about visualizing your ideal classroom while looking at the reality of your classroom and then taking the
Mm-hmm.
steps to transform until you reach that ideal classroom setting.
Yeah, and I think with like desks being having to be maybe far apart from each other, I mean, I think we're gonna really have to transform maybe, where we teach. Maybe it needs to become like the Globe Theater or something where we're teaching in the middle so students can be more spread out. I have absolutely no answer for what's about to happen, but I think you're right. We have to adapt to the real world. This is a real world situation that these kids are living in. I think if we glaze over it, that rapport won't be there. And I think if teachers look at their classroom when they go back in the fall with whatever regulations that are going to happen, and know that it's okay to be upset about it, but know also that it's a great opportunity to transform um, their whole classroom into something new, that it might be an opportunity for them to grow as a teacher. And this is part of increasing engagement anyways. The students might walk in and be like, wow, this teacher really did a good job at this. I'm buying in, you know?
Yes, exactly. Well, and I always say if we're not willing to change, we're not willing to learn, we're doing a disservice to our students because even if we've been doing something and it's been working, there's always something you can add or change or edit to just continuously be improving and transforming yourself, your students, and your classroom.
Yeah, because each year your kids are different, right? And they need different things from you. So for sure. Okay. And the last one is enthusiasm.
Yes. So the main thing about enthusiasm that I loved is that it can be faked. And because I don't feel it every day, but some
Oh, well,
days
no.
I fake it until I feel it. And that's what the author says is you have to stand confidently and speak loudly, and eventually what your body does, even if you're having to fake it, the the brain will follow, right? So if you don't have the
Yes.
enthusiasm right away, still move your body as if, and then your brain will start to feel that enthusiasm.
Oh my gosh. Shoot, that's like one of the first things I'm going to tell our new teachers this next year because I feel like they get so nervous, and they're like, oh, I can't fake it. They'll see right through me. And I'm like, you stand confidently, you speak loudly, and you just do it, and it'll happen. I mean, because I'm an extrovert and a coach, I think I coached before I taught, I had that presence. That wasn't really an issue for me. What was an issue for me was when I would walk in after having a really bad evening, or I remember the first day of school in 2013, the day before my husband was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And then I had to go and teach the very next day was the first day of school. And I did not feel like it. Like it was the first day of school. Like I had to bring it. And I think that's where I had to fake it. And you know what? It actually was able to just get me out of that funk I was in and realize these students need me and they need me to be who I actually am all the time. And I was transparent with them about like what was going on in my life, and I was vulnerable, and I said, but you know what, guys, like it's still going to be a great year and I'm here for you. And luckily my husband recovered and everything was fine. But I think there's times even seasoned teachers are going to have days where they just don't. I'm sure you've had days where you're like, I just don't want to do this today. um
Absolutely.
I get jealous sometimes. My husband gets to go to a cubicle and like not talk to anyone. I'm like, that doesn't happen when you're a teacher. Like you have to like there's
You have to
people.
be on.
Yeah, and there's people like waiting for you. It's not like you can be late from lunch, like, so I think you're totally right. Enthusiasm there. Fake it until you make it, and you will make it because your body, like you said, will just start to do it naturally. That's awesome. Okay, so just kind of to wrap up, what are the benefits do you think of this? We've kind of talked about a lot of them, but is there anything like a short story or something specific you have in mind where you use the strategy and all of a sudden you just realize like this has really shifted my classroom learning space? Like this has really changed the way my teaching has gone after you read the book?
Sure. So actually, one of my favorite hooks that the author talks about is called the teaser hook. And it's where the teacher builds a sense of anticipation when introducing something. So I tend to use this teaser hook when I'm introducing a new Senior Woolley video to my class. So for those of you that aren't language teachers or aren't Spanish teachers and don't know, Senior Woolley creates videos and activities for the Spanish classroom, and they offer repetitive, comprehensible input that allows for effective language acquisition. But the storylines are super goofy and entertaining. The tunes are catchy, so students love them.
Not only students, but Kaylie sent me a link because I was like, what is a Sir Willie video? Because I need to know before we do this. And I just watched it, and my 3-year-old and my 8-year-old were behind me, and they were like, this is fun. And then it was totally in Spanish, and it had like the English subtitles. But this is like the most, like, this scarf fell in love with shoes, with a pair of boots. And it was adorable, and I could totally see that as being a teaser hook for kids.
Well, and so what I decided to do before introducing the very first video is actually the day before at the end of the class period. And you're right. So the 3-part series that I love is called Billy la Bufanda, or Billy the Scarf.
Mm-hmm.
The scarf falls
So
in love
cute.
with a pair of boots. Yeah, it's adorable.
Yes.
But rather than just say, hey guys, tomorrow we're going to watch a video, right? Like, okay, great, but there's not a lot of excitement or energy with
Right.
it. I always try to introduce it in like the most ridiculous, over the top, dramatic way that I can.
Oh, I
and
love it.
tease
Do it.
Right? And it really
Yeah.
draws students in. So like even before we watch, I'll say something like, who's heard of Romeo and Juliet? They raise their hands. Okay, who's heard of Shrek and Fiona, Beauty and the Beast? Well, get ready, because tomorrow we're watching the most epic love story of your generation. And of course, their eyes get all big right here.
Yeah. They're like, oh, is it Taylor Swift and Jonas Brothers? Whatever the Jonas Brothers.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So then, I just keep teasing. It blows all other love stories out of the water. Will you leave class heartbroken? Probably. Is there hope for true love? We'll find out. And then at this point, students are usually asking me questions like, what the heck are we going to watch tomorrow? So then, of course, already being dramatic, I have to keep being dramatic. And I put my hand on my head and I kind of wilt and I say, oh, the memory's too hard to speak of right now. You'll have to come back and watch. And, just, it's a silly, dumb thing, but the students get so into it. And then once we watch it, they're in on the joke, and I have some fake crying. And
oh, so awesome.
They can't wait to watch the next video. Yeah. So it really just makes it fun. And it wasn't hard to do. I just had to change the way I talked about it.
Well, and as an introverted teacher, you said a lot of his strategies were difficult for you, but this you were able to incorporate into your own personality.
Exactly.
I love that so much. And that's what I miss about teaching students is just the teasing them like in those ways. I miss that. Okay, so then he has the kinesthetic hook. Can you go through that kind of quickly? Because I know he's got 3 more, and I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want you to kind of briefly go through the 3, because I think those are important for teachers, especially new teachers that haven't ever taught, to know what they are.
Yes. So he has so many hooks, just dozens and dozens of hooks. I just happened to pull out my favorite. So
okay.
The teaser hook, and then the kinesthetic hook is where I ask myself, how can I incorporate movement into this lesson? Mm-hmm. And actually, a few years ago, had joined a workout boot camp. And at that boot camp, the trainer had done an activity that I thought was super fun. And so I was like, wow, I love that. I got to bring that into my classroom. So then I actually did. I brought the movement game that we did at the boot camp into my classroom. And so the day before, I always tease it and I say, you guys might want to wear activewear tomorrow. Like we're going to be moving around quite a bit, and they're always like, what? In Spanish? This isn't PE. What are we going to be doing?
I love that. I used to do a scavenger hunt, um, a QR code scavenger hunt as a review at the end of each quarter of everything we learned. And I would always do the same thing. Like, okay, now if you're wearing tennis shoes and skirt, you better not wear a skirt or tennis shoes or what. Like, you got to be ready because you're going to be running a lot, and it's a competition. And so you're gonna. And they would just look at me like, what are we doing? So I totally get that. That's so fun. And that's how you get them, right? That's how you get those kids to, and that's what they remember. They go home that night and they tell their parents, like, today in Spanish, we wore activewear and here's what we did. And that's what they want to hear. They want to hear that kind of stuff from their kids, that the parents that are like, oh, that teacher's awesome. She's really connecting with my student.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so what's the taboo hook?
Oh, this one's fun. And
Okay.
it's, keep it school appropriate because I know the name is taboo, but what I usually do with this one is pretend like I have a secret. So like in Spanish, a lot of teachers, accents aren't the most important thing in a language. Communication is. But when
Okay.
I teach students about why accents are used and the different meanings that an accent could give a word, I always phrase it like a secret, like, okay, this is something that a lot of teachers aren't going to tell you, but this is why these are so important. And then I go through a silly example of the accents. Papa, looks like it would be father, but it
Right.
means potato, right? You don't want to go to the movies with your papa because people will think you're crazy. And
That's
then papa, draw the accent, the little line above the last A, and then it does mean father. So we
okay.
always just joke about the meaning and say, okay, that's why it's so important. And even with just that one silly story and the secret of the accents, I don't have to teach it the rest of the year because it's funny and they remember it.
Oh, they totally would. I mean, now I just learned something. I'm like, oh, I would have totally said, like, I'm going with my potato to the movies because I would have had
Yeah.
no idea. So that's awesome. Okay, and then the contest hook.
So this one is just essentially just turning something into a competition, either
Mm-hmm.
with you in the class or between students. So for this one, I like to do review games, escape rooms, and just have that friendly competition. I
Mm-hmm.
love this one, and I love escape rooms. I did an escape room activity one time. Um, and I had a student who was kind of like the cool kid that just liked to lean back and not give any enthusiasm.
Right.
And
We always
he
have
was,
one or
he
two,
was, yeah, yeah. He
maybe
was
four.
so excited to participate in the escape room, and he was so good at it. And so he was participating the entire class period without even realizing it, because at the end of the class period I was like, hey, I loved your participation today, like I didn't know you were so good at puzzles. And then he kind of remembered himself and was like, oh yeah, 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 and just tried to play
Right.
it
That's
off. But
so cool,
really,
right?
he had so much fun and was so excited.
Yeah, and escape rooms aren't too hard to make. I think a lot of teachers are intimidated by escape rooms, but you can do digital escape rooms, which we might need to do if we're not allowed to kind of all be together and touching similar materials next year. But they are not too hard to do, really. I mean, I used them a few times before I was unable to be in the classroom anymore. And I mean, kids that definitely were more quiet or not necessarily as participatory would get into them too. So that's awesome. All right. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of the podcast. I so appreciate you coming on. If listeners want to learn more from you, what can they do to find more from you? Do you have like a social media district on the district webpage? What are you on?
So I tend to use Instagram and Facebook. So my Instagram is at Kaylie Marie P. You could also
Okay.
find me through the district email, kaylee.peterson@gilbertschools.net. And then I also have some classes that I'm teaching coming up that will be in the fall catalog. So just make sure you look at that and feel free to reach out to me whenever, and then try and come to one of my classes if you can. I'd love to have anyone there.
Yeah, and I think you're doing a class on one-pagers, right?
Yes, I think one
Yeah.
pagers, and I think I'm doing an escape room class too.
Yeah, I think you are too. Yeah, so one pager and escape rooms. So if anybody is in the Gilbert Public Schools district, and honestly, we take outside of district too. There's just a $10 fee, which I think is way worth it just to come and get some new ideas. So if you're in a charter school, a private school, but even a public school that just doesn't have a lot of professional development in person, check us out on our district website. We do have post our class catalog for fall, and you can come and take some of Kaylie's classes and learn about one pagers and escape rooms. So thanks so much for coming on the podcast today, Kaylie,
Of
and
course, thank you for having me.
letting us learn about teaching like a pirate. Like, I just learned so much, and I'm super excited to see it in action. Hopefully a lot of teachers got some awesome ideas for starting next school year and how to kind of use a lot of these throughout school. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Britt.
Bye. Have a good one. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about teaching like a pirate to engage your students. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. For the show notes from this episode, please visit our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/PGD YouTube and select playlists. If you have time to write us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would so appreciate it. The more reviews and ratings we get, the more educators will see our podcast. So if you like what you're hearing and learning and think others would too, please head over and provide a review. Thanks again for listening, and have a wonderful day.